and I will invite Ashish Architecture to come and speak on Divan.
Thank you all very much. As you can imagine, we're all still trying to process the situation that we have found ourselves in. And so whatever I have written is really a work in progress. It was, as we all know, and we are really here to speak about Navina, it was less than a year ago that we lost Navina on the 22nd of April, whose work we have gathered today to see and hear, and which we shall remember through this afternoon. We will be really talking about Navina. What was not known as we were preparing for the last several months to have Merle and see the fifth wall, as we were planning and working towards this event, was that by the time we got to this occasion, we would have lost Vivan as well. Present company, largely I think does not need any introduction to who Vivan was. As Vishnu Priya said, he is a very, very familiar person in these spaces. The biographical details, the major landmarks and contemporary art that he participated in and very, very often initiated, these are now well known. The biography is, I think, being reproduced very often in many public obituaries. And yet we have been surprised at the scale of the outpouring of affection that we have encountered in these past few days. Across social media, across all forms of journalism, in activist groups, across the arts, in academic circles, across disciplines, people are mourning this moment as one where they have lost one of their own. Some years ago at an exhibition in Bombay, at the National Gallery of Modern Art, Vivan had done a kind of an improvised archive, and on top of that he got a little ticker tape that went, I'm quoting from memory, the archive, the year after of art. I'm not able to specifically remember that quotation, but I think this idea of remembering and memory is going to be quite important to the evening as we go. Like many of us, I am of course in the process of trying to remember, engage in an activity that along with numerous people has required the production of a veritable archive in real time, as friends have put down their own personal albums, as photographers have dug into their collections to recall moments that have gone back 50 years or more. And we have seen literally in real time the production of an archival condition of the present continuous that might have pleased both Navina and Vivan. A condition that speaks of the past but also the enduring afterlife of events that once occurred. In this case, about the post-colonial condition, I suppose, broadly, to which multiple friends, colleagues, artists near and far, and inevitably historians of this particular moment will return relentlessly both to what we are seeing unfold in real time before us. It is worth remembering then that as we mourn Vivan, we remember that his most recent work is currently on display at Sharjah, and is, like the hereafter of all art, accruing new meaning and even a prescience. That the heights of Machu Picchu, which may have been the first time Vivan perhaps hit his true creative stride, is also currently on display at the Kochi Buenos Biennale, and that in a very short while his landmark memorial, his own act of ritual remembrance for another man, will be on display at the Tate Modern. That the book, Kasauli Art Center, 1976-1991, that Vivan oversaw down to its last detail, will be out soon, and along with it a series of events that Vivan conceptualized. That the Kasauli Art Center itself, which he has designed down to its last detail, will soon be in place. And that the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation, carrying forward both Navina's and Vivan's vision and legacy, has now become a fully fledged arts institution with numerous plans, all conceived by Vivan or in direct consultation with him, which will take a lot of people in this room a few years at least more to realize. This includes grants of support to photography, installation art, archival work, organizational work of various kinds, and of course publication work alongside our very own Tulika books that has set the standard for independent publishing in India now close to 3 decades. Who then is to say that Vivan and Navina are not with us anymore? Can the archive and the afterlife of the historical present now play another role, the role of memory, of mourning, and of celebration that can truly accommodate the preciousness of the present moment as we are encountering it, as they are being remembered all around us? The archive, and one would have, I think, agreed with this line from Derrida that continues the quote, burns with a passion, and that search does not rest. There is a responsibility here, as much as there is desire, to do something that the established apparatus of remembrance simply cannot manage, and to return to the most archaic place of absolute commencement. Thank you.
As Ashish sort of introduced the fifth wall, I will not introduce it again, but it was conceptualized and developed by Mary Kruger and Mareike Benyon and Rebecca Jaliwala in collaboration with Navina Sundaram within the framework of Archive Ausgesehen. I invite Mary Kruger to sort of talk about the archive.
Thanks a lot. And hello, we're very, very happy and thankful to SSAF Foundation and the Goethe Institute that we could come here and be in person with you to present this work we've done over the past 5 years. It's called The Fifth Wall. I will talk about a little bit, and forgive me for those who have been there on Saturday. I will start with the same introduction because there are many faces which I haven't seen on Saturday. So I will start with a very short introduction into the archive, and then I'll hand over to Rebecca, and from there on it will be different ways from Saturday. Okay, let me introduce myself shortly. I'm Merle Krüger. I'm a novelist and a film author. I live in Berlin. And together with the filmmaker Philipp Schäffner, I've been making feature documentary films since 2007. And I've been also writing 5 novels so far, in which I try to combine historical research, personal history, and political analysis with elements of crime literature. As the curator, or one of the curators, together with others, of the transnational cultural project Import-Export Cultural Transfer between India and Germany, in 2005 I began a long-term collaboration with Navina Sundaram. Next to me is Rebecca Jaliwala. She's a freelance editor and translator of literary, art and cultural texts and books. She lives in Mumbai and Berlin. And she is a trainer and educational advisor. And in this profession, she has led workshops on intercultural learning and diversity, anti-racism and gender on 4 continents. She has collaborated with us, we are called POM Films, a small company, since 2005, and she has been responsible for the whole German-English translation, including the film subtitles, the essays, and the entire archive, The Fifth Wall. She has also recited the excerpts of Navina Sundaram's letters for audio recordings here in this archive, and this was Navina's own wish. Then there are persons who are not here today, unfortunately. One is my colleague Mareike Benyon. You've mentioned her. She is an artist and a film scholar herself, and she's currently preparing the first show of this archive as a walk-in installation for the International Hamburg Documentary Week at the end of April. Now it's very sad for me because there are 2 people who have been the first to insist that this archive should be translated and travel back to India and South Asia, and today just one of them is here. Navina Sundaram and Gita Kapoor have encouraged us really a lot, and they said, okay, we will get this translated, and it has an impact here, so I just trust them that this is true. And yeah, I mean, our hearts are with Gita, and this series of events, what we're doing right now, also carrying on to Bangalore, Pune and Bombay, we are doing it in the memory of Vivan. And then there's the person who is in the center of this project. It's Navina Sundaram, known as artist Vivan Sundaram's younger sister, as the painter Amrita Sher-Gil's niece, and as the co-founder of the host organization of this SSAF. But not too many people in India might know that Navina, who passed away almost a year ago, was also a kind of celebrity and an esteemed filmmaker and journalist in Germany. So we would like to let her introduce herself.
Fing immer so an. Asiatische Miniaturen. And now, wait. Also, nee, oh Gott, das ist ja endlos. Also das sind auch Bilder von Indien, ne? Wie man sich das vorstellt. Das ist im Jahre 61 oder 62, glaube ich. So, Studio Neu-Delhi. Ah, und jetzt kommt es. Das bin ich.
Namaste. Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren in Deutschland. Hier meldet sich Navina Sundaram aus dem Fernsehstudio des Norddeutschen Rundfunks in Indien.
It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication to the service of India and her people.
Nehru, ne?
And to the
Das ist die berühmte Unabhängigkeitsrede.
The service of India means the service of the millions who suffer.
Also ich bin ein Nehru-Kind, ne? Da bin ich in
Ja.
Nehrus Vision aufgewachsen in Indien. Das war ganz großartig, das säkulare
So long
Indien.
as there
Ne?
are tears and suffering, so long our work will
Noch
not be
viel
over.
über.
Meine Generation kennt weder die
Ah,
kolonialen...
da bin ich noch bewusst in Sari aufgetreten. Das bewusst auch eingesetzt als Strategie, ne? Wegen der Authentizität.
Schöne Weltspiegelmusik.
Ich begrüße Sie beim Weltspiegel.
Sehr geehrte Herren, es ist ein Skandal, dass diese Sendung von einer Ausländerin moderiert wird. Diese Dame soll doch in ihr Kaffernland gehen. Die Luft ist rar. Die Luft ist rar in solchen Posten. Es ist, weißt du, ich bin ja nicht als Sekretärin oder sowas da gewesen, sondern in diesem redaktionellen Bereich, wo du auch eine gewisse Macht ausübst. Und die Macht ist nicht eine Macht über Menschen, das interessiert mich nicht. Es ist die Macht über Programm, eine Macht über Mittel, um bestimmte Ideen durchzusetzen.
So Kanika, could you, while I'm talking, maybe step it in again? Navina Sundaram worked as a... Navina Sundaram worked as a political television editor, a foreign correspondent and a moderator for the Northern Television channel NDR and for the first public program ARD in Germany. Grown up in the independent Republic of India, Sundaram studied English literature at the University of Delhi, and in 1963, still being a student, she was asked to moderate the broadcast series Asian Miniatures. You just saw it, the one with the fan. Produced at the German television studio in New Delhi, which was just newly established in 1963. As a result, she was invited to complete a 2-year training program as a television journalist at the NDR in Hamburg. And there, she continued to work, permanently employed, for over 30 years. As a filmmaker, editor and moderator, she worked for programs like World Mirror, Weltspiegel, Faces of Asia, Gesichter Asiens, Panorama, and 3 Special, Extra drei, among others. Later, she was an interim ARD foreign correspondent and head of the South Asian television studio in New Delhi herself. During her time at NDR, she became, as far as we know, the first woman of color in the so-called German newsroom, which was run exclusively by white men at that time. Today this has changed thanks to women like Navina Sundaram, who became role models for daughters of guest workers or refugees in exile. After leaving NDR in 2004, Navina Sundaram continued her work as an independent director of documentaries and author of numerous texts and lectures. So I'll show you now how to get into the archive. It's the web address is b-fifth-wall.net. And here we are at the landing page. And to let you know what we understand as an online archive, it is a web platform, it is a production archive, and it's a work biography at the same time. It's made out of ARB Holdings and Sundaram's private archive. At the center of the German site are 67 films and broadcast contributions, of which 56 are now subtitled in English. And assembled around these films are documents, letters, manuscripts, photographs, correspondences, as well as lectures. And what we call the foyer here, you'll find a collection of material. The trailer you just saw, photos, quotes, and a letter to her mother from the night of the moon landing on July 21st, 1969, which also explains the name of the archive. So if you get in, you just click on the letter and then you can hear it. At the bottom of the page, you'll find a registration button. We skip the registration now, but it's basically a control mechanism that Navina insisted upon as she feared racist and right-wing interference all her life through. And we also felt it's good to have a somehow protected safe space for this material, which is professional material, but it's also private material. It's letters and all of this. So the registration is free, you are registered by email, and you get immediate access to the entire archive, which is of course free of cost for everyone. And we will move now right into the interior of the archive. Okay, this is how it shows if you enter. As a constantly changing structure, the roots of this archive reach far into the historical and political ramifications of the 20th century, especially its media and television history, which is of course also contemporary political history. Themes such as international politics in South Asia, the Cold War, gender, class issues and labor, ecology, migration and asylum policy in Germany, they run through this archive. And in addition to this, Navina Sundaram's own experience with the field of public television as a woman and as a migrant, and therefore addressing intersectionality, become apparent. The archive brings together different traces, contribution and references as a mosaic. At first glance, these materials and their different kinds of languages, private and professional, stand side by side like fragments of memory. Seemingly without a hierarchy, they form an assemblage, which is reassembled each time the archive is pulled up. The object, as you can see here, are interrupted by black spaces that refer to the gaps and fractions of the archive. Because this archive itself is only an excerpt, incomplete, and can only ever remain fragmentary. Because we didn't get all the films from India. Some are disappeared, some they wouldn't give us, then we ran out of money at a certain point. So it's always, and I think every archive is incomplete, and that was important for us to also show in the web design. And I would like to give a short background here. I just mentioned money. Public television in Germany and Europe in the 1960s, 70s and 80s and up to now has been a competitive, largely white male world. Navina Sundaram took a very specific view on this, which was kind of unique in German television at the time, and stemmed from her specific, what we call, situatedness. Between tree and bark is what she calls this migrant situated knowledge herself. Between India and Germany, between here and there, between inside and outside. To take her point of view, or to place ourselves nearby her point of view, to focus on her reports, contributions and films, meant to look at German television history from an insider-outsider perspective, as she calls it. That's the subtitle of the archive. A perspective she shared with others, for example, with Roshan Danjiboy, we just talked about her with Peter before, who was also one of the few migrants and persons of color who shaped television in Germany during the same time. And certainly there were few at that time, and today are many others whose names we might not even yet know. The public archives are not really public, so if you want to get into these archives, you need a lot of knowledge. First of all, what you want, then you need money for copying purposes. You have to be a scientist or a journalist. It's very difficult to get access, and therefore we're really happy. I mean, it took me, I think, at least 3 years to get this stuff out of the, and it's also meant to be a gatecrasher. I mean, we want other archives follow. For example, Roshan Danjiboy's work is still hidden there. No one knows of it now anymore. So we really see this as a kind of pioneering project. And we were very glad to develop this project, not isolated, but in a context called Archive außer sich, which is, I would translate it as archives beside themselves, or archives off the leash, or archives going wild even. Initiated by Arsenal Film, Institute for Film and Video Art in Berlin, which has become a network of mostly transnational projects of film archives. I'll just now quickly get you a little bit into the architecture of the archive. It's like a shelf, right? There's 56 films in the shelf, there's so and so many letters in the shelves, text and all this. It's not, we don't have a filter function. I didn't want a filter function. I wanted a sorting function. So the archive is like this shelf, which you can resort by yourself, but you can't take anything out, and then it's just little left in the end. So you can sort it from different. So here you can see, if you sort by archive material, you will see the films first, and then we come down to the photos. And behind each photo, not each, but many of them, there are again series of photos. Like this one, for example, it's a shooting of a film in Germany. And so if you go inside, you open a slideshow, and then you can go through this. So this is how it's structured, right? You will see it anyway. Once I'm going through, and also going through while Rebecca is talking, you will see how it's very easy actually, self-explanatory. You can also sort by theme, and we tried, with these themes, we tried to reflect Navina's situatiousness and her refusal to locate herself in only one place. We didn't want a Eurocentric angle, like, German politics and then the rest of the world politics. So we tried to reflect this by giving the themes media, migration, international politics, decolonization, culture, human rights, racism, labor relations, gender, global economy, and other. Then you can also sort by broadcast series. These are the series which I mentioned. This is, for example, Tagesschau. It's the main news program in Germany. So people who know German television can sort by this, and also by year of production. And then there is one more thing which I just want to mention. This is the workspace, and right now in the English version it just has only the lounge, which is now. But we want this space to grow, and until now it contains in German events like this. It will also contain the events which were streamed now here in India, so it will grow. And in the next weeks and months, we want to show here paths through the archive, extracts, curatorial perspectives, educational tools, and additional text for people to use it. So, and if you, for example, as a teacher or as a lecturer or with a group of students, you discover something you would like to share, you just email us and we will put it online as well. So this is a living archive. This is very important for us. It's an archive which is to be used and also shows that it is used. And before I hand now over to my colleague Rebecca Jelliwell for a thematic walk along the axis of feminism, I'd like to end on an excerpt of a text which Navina wrote for a lecture held in 1992 in Lübeck as a preface to the film we're screening today, Behind Each Curtain, and which we'll see later. And just a short excerpt of the text. It's called The Woman in Indian Society. So imagine you are 1992 in the northern German town of Lübeck. When two disparate societies touch each other, whether that is urban and rural society in India, or tribal society and Hindu society, or on the international level, the first world and the third world, then there is a danger that this contact will reinforce the relationship of domination and prostration. I believe that the contact of Western so-called development organizations, as well as Western women's movements, with their respective counterparts in India, has reinforced precisely this relationship of domination and prostration. Namely, the former decide what the priorities should be for the third world. They simply assume that progress in third world countries must be a mirror image of progress in first world countries. For them, everything is just a matter of time. This assumption has done a lot of damage.
It has led to catastrophic misunderstandings. The import of problem solving that constantly takes place, let's say, from New York or Berlin to New Delhi is passed on from the capital New Delhi to the villages of India. The arrogance to decide what is important mostly comes from the metropolises, and this access to the definition and articulation of problems is in itself extremely problematic. This she said in 1992, before some certainly shocked German housewives and equally shocked feminist activists in Lübeck. And now I hand over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Mala. So as Mala has just presented to us, the fifth wall is a treasure trove of material comprising films, reportages, texts, letters, photographs. It's a tremendous resource that can be accessed to discuss and address the themes of interculturality and diversity, gender, racism, migration, and to explore strategies to transform spaces and hierarchies. So the thematic walk on the axis of feminism that I will present today now is just one example of how this archive can be used for educational purposes. So basically I'm going to take you over the next 30 minutes through various excerpts or reportages of Navina Sundaram's, some commentaries, some of her commentaries, and excerpts from some of her, of one of her films. So let's start first with the Bundestag debate, Article 218, Bundestag being the German parliament, of course. Now, this was shot in 1991, or even broadcast in 1991. This is Navina Sundaram's first and only Tagesthemen, that is the daily news commentary, which addresses the recurring debate in the German parliament about Article 218 of the Criminal Code, which criminalizes abortion. So Navina Sundaram uses this public platform to demand the complete removal of the paragraph, which neither prevents abortion nor strengthens morality, but criminalizes women who are well aware of their dilemma. So let's take a look at the reportage and then.
Zur Debatte um den Paragraphen 218 nun der Kommentar von Navina Sundaram.
Die Zulassung eines Hormonpräparates RU 486 könnte mit einem Schlag die ganze Diskussion um den Paragraphen 218 überflüssig machen. Die Abtreibungspille ist schon auf dem europäischen Markt zu haben, wenn noch nicht auf dem deutschen. Ich sehe schon vor meinem geistigen Auge die Buskolonnen mit entschlossenen Frauen Richtung Frankreich, Großbritannien, Schweden und die Schweiz ausschwärmen, so wie vor 20 Jahren Frauen in ihrer Verzweiflung sich nach Holland karren ließen, um die restriktive Abtreibungspolitik in der Bundesrepublik zu umgehen. Am besten wäre in der Tat, diesen unsäglichen Paragraphen zu streichen, der seit er besteht nichts Gescheites bewirkt hat. Weder hat er Abtreibungen verhindert, noch festigte er das Fundament der Moral. Im Gegenteil, er kriminalisierte unzählige Frauen in ihrer Not, stürzte sie in einen noch tieferen moralischen Zwiespalt als den, in dem sie sich befanden. Denn wer glaubt, dass eine Frau mit einer ungewollten Schwangerschaft sich des Dilemmas nicht bewusst ist, zwischen den Interessen des Embryos und ihren eigenen zu entscheiden und dass die Entscheidung abzutreiben ihr leicht fällt, der hat ein merkwürdiges Frauenbild, nämlich das eines entscheidungsunfähigen, moralisch schwankenden, unverantwortlich handelnden, ja sündhaften Wesens. Einer der CDU-CSU-Entwürfe scheint diesem Denken zu entspringen, denn er glaubt, den Konflikt ausschließlich durch Herrschaft über die Frau lösen zu können. Die Entscheidung soll ein Arzt treffen, mit strafrechtlicher Verfolgung wird gedroht. Obwohl einiges darauf hindeutet, dass eine gesellschaftliche Mehrheit für die Entscheidungsautonomie der Frau in der Abtreibungsfrage vorhanden wäre, ist wohl keiner der 6 Gesetzesentwürfe allein parlamentarisch mehrheitsfähig. Es wird wohl wieder auf einen Kompromiss hinauslaufen. Dass es kein allzu fauler wird, liegt zuletzt an uns Frauen. Wir brauchen keine Belehrung, Zwang oder Strafe, um an unsere Verantwortung für das ungeborene Leben erinnert zu werden. Die Verantwortung für ein Kind haben wir seit eh und je schon immer tragen müssen. Nun wollen wir auch Entscheidungsbefugnis.
Navina Sundaram kommentierte.
Okay, so we see that this reportage by Navina criticizes the underlying image of women and reveals how gender identity is ascribed to women's bodies. Let's take a look at a commentary by Navina. No editor-in-chief wanted to take up the topic, which is quite interesting. It was shot in 2018.
In den täglichen Konferenzen, da haben die einzelnen Sendeanstalten, die in der ARD sind, von der Redaktion, jeweiligen Chefredaktion, ein Quota, also je nachdem, wo du hingehörst. Und dann, wenn der NDR dran war, dann meldete sich und dann der Chefredakteur fragte in die Runde, wer möchte. Nun wollte kein Chefredakteur dieses Thema machen. Und dann gucken die rum, wer ist hier als Frau und wer ist zufälligerweise auch präsent an dem Tag. Ne? Vielleicht sind die anderen Kollegen. Und ich war da und dann habe ich gesagt, klar, ich melde mich auch.
Let's move on to another reportage that Navina did called Women's Shelters. And this was shot and broadcast in 1983.
Einrichtungen, die misshandelten Frauen und ihren Kindern Schutz gewähren, sind an Feiertagen besonders gefragt. In Zeiten hoher Arbeitslosigkeit führen Familienkonflikte, verbunden mit Alkoholkonsum, immer häufiger zu Gewalttätigkeiten an Frauen.
Bilder aus Deutschland. Für viele Frauen offensichtlich der Alltag. In diesem Lande, wo Tierliebe fast eine Bürgerpflicht ist, gilt Frauenmisshandlung immer noch als Familienangelegenheit und wird häufig nicht verfolgt. Aber Frauen wollen die Schläge nicht mehr hinnehmen. Schutz für sich und ihre Kinder bieten seit 1977 Frauenhäuser. 110 gibt es davon in der Bundesrepublik. Zum größten Teil gehören sie der autonomen Frauenbewegung. Überbelegt sind die Frauenhäuser das ganze Jahr hindurch. An Feiertagen ist der Andrang am stärksten. Weihnachten 82 suchten knapp 1800 Frauen mit 3500 Kindern Schutz vor den Schlägen ihrer Männer.
Ich bin von meinem Freund zusammengeschlagen worden, bin dann mit meinen Kindern aus der Wohnung geflüchtet und bin zum nächsten Polizeirevier gegangen. Und die haben mich dann nach mehreren Umfragen in den Häusern, wo freier Platz war, haben die mich dann ins Frauenhaus gebracht.
Der hat immer gesagt, er trinkt nicht, aber ich habe es auch sehr spät rausgekriegt. Ich habe zusammen mit ihm 4,5 Jahre gelebt. Ich habe 2 Kinder und geschlagen hatte mich 3 Jahre lang.
Also ich denke, Alkohol spielt bestimmt eine Rolle mit, aber Frauenmisshandlung ist so der Gipfel der Frauenverachtung in dieser Gesellschaft. Und ich denke, das hängt an den unterschiedlichen Machtverhältnissen zwischen Männern und Frauen.
Die autonome Frauenbewegung will das Selbstbewusstsein der Frauen stärken, damit sie ihr eigenes Leben gestalten. Das Interesse der Behörden liegt manchmal anders. Ehen kitten, Familienverhältnisse wiederherstellen. Schließlich kommen selbstständig denkende Frauen, die ihnen zustehende Sozialhilfe in Anspruch nehmen, dem Staat teuer zu stehen.
Actually by the state, which is mainly trying to restore marriages. And then we can question whether the state is in fact in cahoots with the church, whose main purpose is also, reproduction and keeping the marriage and all of that. But then in all of this, I would also go one step further and ask, where are the spaces for gender beyond heteronormativity? So, because there seems just a reproduction of heterosexual genders and nothing beyond that. So let's look at Navina's commentary here and what she thinks about this. Is that okay?
Immer sehr misstrauisch, wenn es darum geht, irgendwelche Werte hochzuhalten, als das von in einer Kultur immanent drin sein. Und da besonders bei der Ehe als Bezeichnung dafür, dass in der Ehe ist der Heil zu suchen. In der Ehe ist dann die Vollendung für die Frau und diesen ganzen Schrott, den man da abwerfen wollte und in der Emanzipationsdebatte und auch dann was auch in den 70ern so hochkam mit der Abtreibung und die Selbstbestimmung der Frau, all diese Sachen, da bin ich immer misstrauisch, wenn man sagt, hier, die Familie ist der Hort unserer Gesellschaft. Also das ist so die gängige. Und dann kriege ich dann, die Stacheln gehen hoch.
Yeah, so I think Navina also very nicely shows us how we all need to question also our own influences because a lot of us are caught up also in this reproducing gender roles in one way or the other, and until we question them at whatever level we need to for ourselves, we won't move and make space for others and for all the others that are out there. Because a lot of us are also others in different contexts. So let's move on now to the section which I think really also shows gender discrimination and also intersectionality. Now I would like, this is a panel discussion that takes place. It's about women in power in the global south. So you have, that's Roshan Nanjiboy and Navina Sundaram. So you have three women and 3 men on the panel. And I just want to show you the first, 22 seconds of this before we then move to another excerpt, just to tell you how it starts.
Wahrhaftig ausgewogen wie nie. Es ist erreicht Gleichberechtigung, Gleichgewichtigkeit. Nicht nach Kilo und Gramm, denn da bringen Männer immer noch einiges mehr auf die Waage, aber vielleicht nach Kilowatt, womit ich die Unwägbarkeiten meine, mit denen Frauen immer noch zu überraschen verstehen. Aber von der Allegorie zur Arithmetik. Es gibt 3 Damen und 3, ja was denn, ein Hundsfott, der als Mann von sich selber sagt, er sei ein Herr, also 3 Mannsbilder.
Okay, so this is the start of the talk show. This is the very first statement made by the moderator.
It's very famous, the thing. It was every Sunday happening, and there were always international journalists as guests. So it was like Germany's window to the world, kind of Sunday.
So he's basically saying that they've achieved equality with the right amount of women and men on the podium, and then continues to say that the men are the heavyweights, whether in body size or somehow differently. But women, of course, are whimsical, erratic, wild, and unpredictable. So that's a brilliant start to talking about women in power in the global south. So let's go to an excerpt later.
In ihrer, gesehen sozusagen in ihrer limitierten gesellschaftlichen Bild, für was sie machen.
Gut, leuchtet mir ein. Frau Carola Stern, Frau Indira Gandhi hat unter anderem den törichten und gescheiterten Versuch unternommen, eine Dynastie zu etablieren. Sie war schon die Tochter ihres Vaters und ihr Sohn sollte dann praktisch ihr Kronprinz werden. Und Frau Banderaneyke hat das, glaube ich, sogar im Massenstil gemacht. Die hat also ganze Geschlechter ins Rennen gebracht. Ist Vetternwirtschaft, Basenwirtschaft eine besondere Methode vielleicht mit Mütterlichkeit zu erklären bei Frauen?
Nein, ich halte das für ein Vorurteil, das sehr häufig anzutreffen ist. Und ich glaube, dass dies, wenn man so sagen will, etwas agitatorisch den Männern abgeguckt ist. Und zwar deshalb, weil wir das eigentlich sozusagen im englischen Weltreich haben wir diese Dynastien gehabt. Und dann, wenn Sie sich heute umsehen, denken Sie zum Beispiel mal an Nordkorea, einen kommunistischen Staat, und an Kim Il-sung, und Sohnemann soll der Nachfolger werden.
Das ist nicht bewiesen.
Ja, aber jedenfalls,
das
ist auch eine Art. Es gibt das im kommunistischen Staat, dann nehmen wir ein anderes Beispiel, zum Beispiel in Rumänien. Nicht? Frau Ceausescu scheint mir hauptsächlich ins oberste Parteiorgan gekommen zu sein, weil sie die Frau von Herrn Ceausescu ist.
Aber Sie sprechen immer von Diktaturen.
Ja.
Wir müssten mehr von Demokratien sprechen.
Nein, wir müssen auch von Entwicklungsländern sprechen. Ein zweites Beispiel ist Haiti, ist auch eine Diktatur. Da gab es also, ich glaube, Papadoc hieß der, und der Sohn ist jetzt dran. Und gucken Sie sich mal in Afrika um. Ich glaube nicht, dass es dort möglich wäre, dass Töchter sozusagen die Nachfolge antreten könnten, etwa in Kenia oder in Sambia. Aber die ganze Familie ist dort auch untergebracht. Und das hat wieder was zu tun mit Familienwirtschaft und mit Stammeswirtschaft. Das heißt, es hat gar nichts, ist keine besondere Eigenschaft von Frauen.
Ja, aber die Stammeswirtschaft gibt in Ihrem Land auch, Herr Steed.
Darf ich einen Gedanken einwerfen? Ich glaube, obwohl ich selber gesagt habe, dass Golda Meir diese Härte gezeigt hat, dass normalerweise die weiblichen Eigenschaften kommen heraus und werden irgendwie betont in der Art, wie eine Frau Ministerpräsident ist. Und ich glaube, die Welt ist jetzt in einer Lage, wo diese weiblichen Eigenschaften sehr notwendig sind. Die weiblichen Eigenschaften, zum Beispiel die Haushalt zu führen. Also das ist für uns in England vor allem das Notwendige. Wenn man von Wirtschaft spricht, früher war das in Zahlen über
das bleibt so.
Zinsen und so weiter. Nein, sobald das Wort zum Beispiel im Fernsehen bei Nachrichten das Wort Wirtschaft gesagt wird, da kommt ein Einkaufskorb und eine Hausfrau.
Im englischen Fernsehen?
Im englischen.
Also so weit sind wir in der Banalität ja noch nicht gedacht.
Die Dame Thatcher will die Todesstrafe einführen. Hat das auch was damit zu tun?
Nein, das stimmt nicht.
Doch.
Nein,
doch, das stimmt. Sie hat immer wieder dafür gestimmt.
Das stimmt nicht.
Immer wieder.
Und außerdem noch, die Eigenschaft der Frau in der Familie. Ich glaube, die westliche kapitalistische Zivilisation leidet moralisch darunter, dass der Einfluss der Familie geschwächt wird. Und da ist natürlich die Frau führend. Und ich glaube, und das sieht man auch mit Margaret Thatcher, diese moralischen Werte und Begriffe, die in der Familie verankert sind, die fehlen uns. Und ich glaube, soweit England in Frage kommt, dass man hofft auch, dass Thatcher nicht nur das Regieren vom Standpunkt aus der Hausfrau sehen will, sondern auch vom Standpunkt aus der Familienmutter.
Wir leben in einer Welt von Nord-Süd-Konflikten, von einer globalen Arbeitslosigkeit, von zusammenwachsenden... Und jetzt reden wir plötzlich von der Erhaltung von einer kleinen, so nuklearen Familie und als eine Mutterfigur. Das sind so absurde, glaube ich, Erwartungen, die jetzt gestellt werden an eine Frau oder so. Wir brauchen bestimmte, also nennen wir dieses gesetzliche Wort.
Konflikt? Das
Sie
ist
haben noch
ein
nicht davon
Ost-West-Konflikt.
Die Leute im Süden verhungern und die im Norden, denen geht es immer besser. Das ist der
richtige und die einzige Hoffnung derjenigen, die im Süden verhungern, ist Hilfe der reichen, humanen, westlichen, kapitalistischen Ländern und nicht von den kommunistischen Ländern, die überhaupt nichts machen, sondern nur Waffen liefern und Kriege führen.
Das ist nicht wahr.
Das ist die Wahrheit.
Ihr Land war der größte Ausbeuter, der größte Verursacher dieser Nord-Süd-Konflikt. Das sind zwei Leute, die das Ihnen bezeugen können.
Wo wäre England, wo wäre Indien und Pakistan und Ceylon ohne die Zivilisation?
Also bitte stieg, meine Damen, ich habe die gelbe Karte der linken Tasche und die rote Karte der rechten Tasche. Ich zeige keine Karte. Ich finde das sehr aufschlussreich, wie Sie hier gestritten haben.
Nein, das ist nicht aufschlussreich. Ich meine auch, dass der Nord-Süd-Dialog wichtiger ist als der Ost-West-Beziehung im Grunde genommen. Was Herr Brezhnev und Carter zusammen machen, ist ungeheuer wichtig, aber was die zusammen machen können für die Nord-Süd-Dialog ist wichtiger.
Eine letzte Frage an Referent Stied. Gibt es Untersuchungen?
I don't think I need to say much about that. But the important thing is that the British guy, Reginald Steele, gets most of the talking time in comparison to Roshan Zanjibai and Navina Sundaram. And Carola Stern, the German reporter, is hardly interrupted. So also, as there's a commentary on this also by Professor Alexander Schneider, who talks about it, and she said that also Navina was invited to a lot of these events on television, or a lot of these shows, and was always asked by the moderator, Hofer, to appear in a sari. And she always rejected that, always refused to do that. And so, I mean, this is women in color in politics are consistently used as a cultural symbol and stopped and interrupted when talking. So that's a very good example also of intersectionality. It's not just about where you come from, but also gender playing a role. I would at this point like to just read out, in terms of intersectionality, also a letter that Navina received from the audience on one of the films that she shot. It's not a film that you will see, but I'll just read an excerpt of it. It is in German, and I've translated it just for today. So, but Mary can bring it up on the screen. So basically, it's Karlsruhe, 21st April 1986. To the first German television press department, Weltspiegel. Subject: your Weltspiegel program of Sunday evening, 7:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Dear sirs. No. Next. Anyway, so this, I'm starting right in the middle. Furthermore, I would like to know from you who the lady was who led and commented on this program. Surely she wasn't German, was she? In the Federal Republic of Germany, we're trying to achieve equality for women in the workplace. But in television, it's been there since a while. Don't you have any qualified German men, as before, who can bring this highly contentious program to us television viewers? Nothing against women, especially if they're German, but it would be better to give such places to men, who can perhaps also be fathers. Or better said, who can be breadwinners of the family, based on their earnings, that is, their work performance. Do you actually believe that in neighborly foreign countries such as England, France, Spain, or Italy, just to name a few, German speakers or commentators are allowed to speak on their respective stations? I don't believe it, despite all the friendships in the world. It is only in the Federal Republic, without a peace treaty, that apparently everything is possible, whether the viewer likes it or not. That's the way it is. So that's more or less the end. Do we have? another 2 minutes?
Yeah.
So basically we come to the end, and I would like to end with a commentary of Navina's, because this also always ends with the question of what can one do and what action or intervention there is possible. And we will see a film now which also shows one way of dealing with it. But this is, we showed it the other day as well. She took a stand, and I think for JNU as well, from what all I know, everyone takes a stand, and I think we always need also to be reminded that we have to speak up and take a stand. So it's a short one.
One question, is it easier if I don't go to full frame for you to read?
Yes. Ich habe eine Meinung gehabt und die habe ich immer noch. Ich war sehr engagiert und ich habe keinen Hehl daraus gemacht. Ich habe mich auch immer dagegen verwahrt, zu sagen, die einerseits, andererseits. Ich sage, ich mache einen Film, weil ich habe einen Standpunkt. Sonst soll jemand anderes den Film machen. Und das ist dann etwas, was für mich sehr wichtig war. Ich will wissen, wenn ich einen Film sehe, wo steht der Mensch? Ne? Na gut, das war unsere ganze Generation auch von Journalisten, die so vorgegangen sind in den, mit einem dezidierten, man hatte auch einen dezidierten rechten Standpunkt. Also ich weiß nicht, ob du dich an einen Gerhard Löwenthal erinnern kannst. Und dann hatten wir jemanden wie Peter Merseburger auf der anderen Seite. Das ist ein bisschen vorher gewesen als diese Debatte, aber das waren die beiden Lagern oder sagen wir mal ein politischer Standpunkt, was wichtig war. Dann später hieß es, wir waren zu politisch.
Neutralität muss gewahrt.
Es muss entideologisieren, haben die das genannt, was absolut Quatsch ist. Weil auch die Entideologisieren ist auch eine Ideologie. Ja. Ist wirklich. Ja. Und was du dann verbreitest mit einer reine Wiedergabe von dem, was du siehst, das ist Quatsch. Es ist eine sehr verlogene Debatte. Und dann finde ich es einfach besser, wenn man die Haltung zeigt. Und dafür kriegt man dann Schläge oder auch nicht. Und dann muss man dann dazu stehen. Ne?
I would like to say something. I don't know, do we go on with the screening now?
Yes.
I would like to give a short introduction to the film. We will screen it from a hard disk because that might be easier.
One laptop in the mouth.
Sorry, I can't. Is this the film we will see today? We screen now the documentary Behind Each Curtain, which was filmed by Navina Sundaram in 1989. It's a film shot on location in Kasauli, in the Himalayan village in which Ivan and Navina Sundaram had inherited a house owned by the family of their mother. It was soon known for the so-called Kasauli art camps. In this summer of '89, a young theatre director called Anuradha Kapoor called a group of women together to work on a theatre production collectively. And I'm very glad, and it's not just saying it, I'm very glad to have been able to drag this film out of the closed archives of German public television and to bring it back to India, being translated by Rubaika, and to hand it over today to the women to who I'm sure Navina Sundaram would want it to be now. Thank you.
It was nostalgia for many. It's so important historically because when we look at the feminist practices, feminist theatre practices, this is a workshop we've talked about, we've spoken to Anuradha and Anamika, who all been part of it, and we've talked about it. So today we are really grateful to Navina Sundaram for having documented it, and for Malay and people of the Fifth Wall to have recovered and brought it for us. So I start with the the overall thematic of the program, and that pertains to Navina Sundaram like no other. An outsider's inside view or an outsider view. So today, as part of the panel, we have two insiders who you just saw, Anuradha Kapoor and Madhushri Datta, and and also somebody who's not so much of an outsider, and she'll talk about it, is Mangai. So welcome to all of you. It's such an honor to have all of you here. So, I'll just talk a little bit. They need no introduction, but a little bit of the commonalities. They're all renowned theatre makers who have always combined theory, history, practice, interface. They've all been engaged with pedagogy, imparting knowledge, skills to students, training younger colleagues in the most generous way possible. All of them have been very important in what we regard as feminist theatre practices. Anuradha in Delhi, where she has been a leading director, written extensively about experience and experience of her colleagues. And she's an independent theatre maker, but also a teacher in National School of Drama. She was the director of the National School of Drama. And then we have Madhushri, who's also worked with Anuradha from her days of training, but an independent theatre and a filmmaker. Madhushri's also worked in Calcutta, and she's worked with organizations, feminist organizations like Sher-Gil. We have Mangai, who of course works in a different regional context, but we know her for extensive work with community theatre and also her very important book on the feminist practices. Now for a little bit of individual introduction. So Mangai is an academic, activist, theatre maker, director and playwright. She's been part of Aidwa, Kalakuzu, and she has done remarkable work in community theatre and been a founding member of Chennai Kalakuzu, Sakti, Palkalai Arangam, Voice in Silence, and Marapachi. Her plays have been on Pachamanu, which is on female infanticide in 1994. Yar Kutravali, who is guilty for the Aidwa, Panithi, the Frozen Fire, and One Can Only Laugh, which was at the time for COVID, a digital performance. Her book, Acting Up, Gender and Theatre in India since 1979, has become a very important sort of text for reference. Madhushri Datta is co-founder of both Majlish and Shatitana, both very important feminist groups. She is also the curator of the first feminist art festival in 1980 called Expressions. 1990, sorry, yes, called Expressions. She has also worked with Malini Bhattacharya on a play on dowry, Meri Lishadie, and I especially mention it because that's a time when Anuradha, Maya, they were also doing Om Swaha in Delhi. She specializes in gender construction, urban development, and public arts and documentary practices. Her first film, Live in Berhampada, was on a Muslim ghetto and riots in Bombay in 1993. Seven Islands and a Metro is a film on Bombay. And many of you in class have seen her work on Scribbles of Akka. She has published Project Cinema City 213 along with our own Kaushik Bhome and City Dates Sites with Shilpa Gupta in 2012. Anuradha has been, teaching here. She's come so many times. She needs really no introduction. But I think it's only fair that she gets an equal share. Director, pedagogue, who started the MSD, but also worked extensively with the group Vivadi. Her productions, Job, Umrao, Antigone, Amrit, we've seen the videos in classes, referred to it. Her publications include Actors, Pilgrims, Kings and Gods, the Ramlila at Ramnagar, brought out by Sigal in 1990. Again, it's part of the texts which you all read. She's co-edited with Zareli and Shashidharan Intercultural Acting and Performance Training. Anuradha has written extensively on the Parsi theatre and is probably, the reference text we look at. One of them, of course, we just did recently, Love in the Time of Parsi Theatre. Her very important seminal essay, it's just an essay, but it's sort of, one of the very significant texts we use to understand what feminist practices in India, and today the film sort of resonated with it, which is Reassembling the Modern. So I welcome all three of you, and I start with asking Anuradha and Madhushri about their response to this experience which, they had. They were such important sort of participants in this workshop. But today, looking at a documentary made on it, how do you look back at the workshop? How do you look at the documentary which you are seeing out today after so many years? And how do memories of the workshop, what you're saying in the documentary, how do they resonate with both of your works today? So to Anuradha and Madhushri.
Thank you so much, and thank you for agreeing to host this event. It's very special for me and for my family that we are here, and that we have looked at a work that happened in 1989, and while watching it over the last couple of days, several things came to my mind, and one of the things that came to my mind was a word which we use so much in the theatre, materializing. But it seems very interesting to see over here that it was an attempt to materialize ideas on a parallel stream. There is the conference that was organized by Kumkum Sangari, which was called Representations of Women, Prescriptive and Fictional Texts. So in the morning, we were talking about this, and in the afternoon, we were rehearsing. So there was an attempt to cross-pollinate, which happened, and as the rehearsals developed, what we felt was that we were constantly going into what was called the pit to rehearse, and the seminar and the conferences and the debates were being were at the dining hall of Ivy Lodge. But what it seems to me when I look at this is that one word which we use in various ways in the theatre, but I think what comes out in looking at this documentary is the utter vulnerability of process and the precarity of process. And to open process out and to see it being opened out puts all of us, and especially those of us who were there, and here it's Madhushri and myself, that an open rehearsal is at any time precarious, and at any time open to great failure. And I think that it's quite interesting that through this process, we were building in constant debate and critique. And I have to say, I remembered with my heart, stomach churning how much anxiety. So, there's a conversation on the bench, and you go down and you see, my goodness, this is completely one-dimensional, what is this? And how to attempt to change it, what to do, how to actually to bring in a comment, to bring in a discourse about something. It was really tilting all the time. It was precariously moving, and that, I think, seems to me one of the most special aspects of this workshop. And I would say that it's also a special aspect for many of our journeys. I'm speaking for others, but I think for Anamika, for Madhushri, for many of us, at that point, the taking the position that however precarious it may be, and however prone to failure, there would be some continuance of a collaboratory mode. And I think that there I want to bring in is one of the first experiences of working with different mediums, whether it would be the visual artist, Nilima Sheikh, whether it would be the puppeteer, Dadi, whether it would be Vidya Rao, who was at that moment articulating things about Tumri. And so many things at that time became layered, or actually put together, as it were, stitched together, and I'll come back to this word stitched together, there and then. And I think that that became quite important. And also here I'll bring in Gitanjali Shri. This was Gitanjali's first attempt at writing a text. In fact, she did quite a feat because she wrote 2 texts. This was happening right there. She was developing a text as we were workshopping, and then she was also developing a text on of Ghare Baare with Usha Ganguly was there, and we were all working on it at that time. So what happens at that time with Gitanjali's text, for instance, is a sense of interrogation which she seems to have built in to many of her texts. In many of her texts, she asks a question and she places it at peculiar places, unexpected places, even within the text. Why are you doing this? I have no answer. Why are you doing that? Why should we put it here? And I would say that in a sense, she has kept with this activity of placing the interrogation through her text in many ways, through later texts that I have had the pleasure and privilege of working, for instance, to Umrao Jan or Sundari, which is on female impersonation. And the other thing that she seems to have worked, because she was working in situ, as it were, at that time, dealing with what she was saying, putting it on paper, was an understanding of theatre time that was quite unusual. And let me just, and I'll end here, it was unusual because she was working with the absolute present of an improvisation, but she was able, which was very interesting, to look at texts as they came, texts as they existed in the quote-unquote past. And she moved back and forth between past, present, and what could be the future, with a certain kind of shock. And I remember that because it occurred to me that we had been able to produce a situation where time jolts were interesting in a play that was looking at mythology, that was looking at prescriptive texts, that was looking actually at things like givens, especially, let us say, the given of the courtesan. And I'll end by saying that this workshop, and it was brought to my mind so sharply, and what Navina has actually done for the meaning about archiving process, showing up the seams, is that many of the ideas that have come up, and I leave that to Madhu and Nagai, but for instance, the figure of Umrao Jan came to be made into a play in 1993. The meaning of gender and performance came into being a play, again written by Gitanjali, on the life of the female impersonator Jaishankar Sundari. But also, I think what happens is that we began, and I'm quoting Nilima Sheikh here, she said, we are figuring women. I use that a lot when I talk about it. Figuration, figuring, understanding, layering, how to do it. So, lots, as you can see, huge amounts of failure, huge amounts of ricocheting back and forth between a reductive image or an unproductive image and a failed image, all sorts of things. But I think what it did do was it probably marked a kind of process which, and Navina ends there, most of us have stood by, which is a distribution of authorship. So I think that it's a wonderful reminder about, in fact, how to archive lots of things that have failed. Thank you.
Okay, the director had the last word actually. So I, who was practically a kind of intern, as you can see, I have very, very minor role to play, almost silent. not only because I was one of the youngest, but also I was very unformed, which is very interesting, which actually I doubt whether anybody benefited by this workshop more than I did, because I was unformed and I was a silent intern. So when Anuradha says the vulnerability, I look at it a little differently. For me, it was pedagogy beyond the classroom. I think you people have mentioned that who talks about radical pedagogy. Something you were saying in the morning. Okay, so it was pedagogy in practice. It's also my personal relationship with Anuradha. I was just out of college and she was teaching in the same college. So it was that relationship, of course, but still it was what Shiva Chachi quite erroneously called agitprop theatre. It was not agitprop theatre, but a kind of minimalistic theatre that we did before that. Great work, I would say. I mean, that's history. Places like Om Suha and Medili Shaji, as you mentioned, there were also many instances in the south, which one I can say. There was a great work which was done towards the end of the 80s, but in the 90s, which is exactly after the heydays or the most, in a way, creative phase of, not creative, great mobilizing phase of women's movement in the 90s, there is a kind of rethinking about the cultural front being the action wing of the movement. That is how the plays were done. Great works are done, I'm not critiquing it, but I said that's sort of. So there is more had to be done. There has to be more discourses need to be developed, and this workshop was doing that. I know it felt very good for us, is of course, because our skin was better, our hair was better, we all looked younger. But it's also a series of failures. There were some images of some moments I really cringed. Oh my God, we actually said all these things. Many of us will say something completely different, thank God. In 30 years, we changed, we grew, we learned to oppose our earlier phases. So it remains a pedagogical thing. It will also remain a historical piece of a particular time. And if we don't get into the trap of nostalgia, it remains a very, very important pedagogical tool, I would say, since you are all into pedagogy. So that's my one observation now. I mean, obviously, I was not capable of thinking through in those days. But then another thing is that about fragility of collaboration and thinking. I mean, thinking between production and discourse, because discourse is not production. And there was lots of social scientists, historians in that room. It was very difficult to tell them that all discourses cannot be put into a bag and made into a production. So how do you do it? Maybe it's to you, obviously. So all this fragility, but what was interesting, again, it is my today's observation, it was not observation of that time, is that it was not really interdisciplinary. Interestingly, Navina says at one point that for Nelima Sheikh it is different because she is working on order. She doesn't have much of an autonomy. I'm very surprised. I wonder what Nelima would have said if she was here today, because for her it's a different kind of autonomy from the regime of visual art practice or canvas-based practice that she wanted to get into theatre. This is her first work with Anuradha, then she had done a series of work in theatre with Anuradha. Many works are very iconic, you may have seen it also. And that precisely opposite of that she wanted to get rid of exhibition, canvas, frames. She wanted a different frame, I mean scale, in terms of scale, in terms of relationship with human body. It was very important for her, and anywhere she gives interviews, she really talks about this workshop. For her also it was pedagogical, in a way, self-pedagogical. So I would say these were interfaces of disciplines. Many of the people who were in that room, they would become something else in next decade. they may or may not work together, they may or may not even agree with each other but they were interfacing. And their practices at a very infantile stage were actually interfacing. I mean, somebody will write history one day and say that how the seeds of their works were already there, but it was not very much interdisciplinary. It was not woven so much. It was more interfaces because it was so discussive. As Anuradha said, the whole day we will discuss and the evening we will practice. So it is, you know what I'm trying to get at. So that's my one point. Another point is that, what I've written somewhere, this whole thing about, are we getting into better feminist art from the sit theatre days, so to say, okay, Shiva would also not agree with it now, today, but that she said that time, that we are doing it when actually Rustam says that, are we getting into a series of indulgence, you know, feminist breastbeating act in this? Didn't say it so roughly, I'm saying it roughly. And Shiva actually got a little upset and says that, no, enough we have done agitprop, resistance, and then Tanika Sarkar says, but breaking down and getting into indulgence and breastbeating is not resistance, right? Now, this is a very interesting cue to see how I'm not privatizing one over the other, but I'm saying these are the clues, and that's why it's not interdisciplinary, it's interfacial of various ways of thinking, not only practice, not only theatre or visual art and social science, but it's various ways of thinking of what is feminist politics. Yeah, that's it.
So, Mangai, so would you regard yourself as, you know, part of this sort of feminist commitment in art-based practices? What has been the impact of such a workshop on your work? Did it affect you then? And how would you look back in retrospect? Because you ultimately write also about the work of, you know, a lot of the people who are there. And I was just sort of wondering, because you remain very committed to agitprop in your own way and, you know, sort of grassroots sort of practices. And because, you know, Madhushri, you brought up the Shivacharji thing, and, you know, when we look at the archives of the theatre union, the mnemonics is the people, the processions, people standing around. And here, you know, what was interesting is the audience are maybe Tanika, Rustam. So, you know, I was wondering what changes and what not in Mandai's audience.
I mean, my head is still teeming with too many things. But I think I have to describe myself as an outsider, primarily because of the distance. But in terms of the search, in terms of whatever I was looking for, and I always say and also wrote about how expressions really made me stay in theatre, because that was the first time I really looked at the women coming together in joy, in sorrow, in bickering, in fights, everything, you know, just to see that there is a space like that. And now I know that the seed for expressions has been Kasoli, because when I wrote the book, the Kasoli web page only had a few photographs, and maybe one of them has you lying down, you know. So, and then I think there was an article based on that, on one of the Women's Day things. But so after that, in my oral presentations, I included that 1989 workshops, and I really wish that if we had, so that I was here, if we really do a kind of a second edition of Acting Art, which I don't think will be written by one author, you know, we'll certainly have to have this workshop. Having said that, I just want to kind of throw in telegraphic language, because most of you were aware. I've been thinking about 1989 as a magic year. We begin with the murder of Sadr Hashmi, and the performance in the same spot on the third day of the show, and beautifully documented by Sudhanva in his book now. And the birth of Street Theatre Day in India, April 12th, the birthday of Safdar. And we also have, in the summer, we had this workshop for 5 weeks, which is, I mean, it's unimaginable. But now that you explained, you didn't really get the 5 weeks for the production. You know, it was minuscule 3 to 4 hours in the evening, and when you were dead tired, I'm sure. And then in October, we have 2 events happening simultaneously in Delhi. We had the Nehru Natya Samora, out of which has come out a book which all of us read in our academia, of Theatres of Independence by Aparna Darwadkar. And of course I have my own take on that and the critique of that. Right next door was Chowrak. In fact, I remember that I came as a participant of Chowrak, along with Chennai Collector. And we managed to steal time to watch a few plays, sitting down on the ground, you know, asking people to let us in and things like that. So that's how I got Agra Bazaar, a few other plays that were part of Vada Chiravanti and other things. So I think put together of all these things, 1989 seems to give us a lot to really mull over, you know. And I mean, I owe it to the leftward editorial team of Vijay and Sudhanva to put that year, 1979, which Om Swaha brought in, and then simultaneously there were many things happening in Bombay, Kolkata, Chennai, you know. So somewhere 1979 seems to have been Aurat of Janam, you know, so everything led us to that 1979. But now I'm just thinking, you know, because we are on the topic of archive, and this is a digital archive, and it has come back to us after so many years, you know. I'm just taking the cue from Diana Taylor's book, Repertoire, Archive and the Repertoire. So I think performance of whatever kind is already an archive. It's an embodied archive of sorts. So, and then there are rereadings that happen when we do a production of this kind. So what I'm really kind of impressed by, and that excitement, you know, it's not a hangover that leaves you on one day, because I remember texting as soon as I had seen the, so it's kind of, you know, rippling through the head. And, you know, discussions about funding, which were raging at that time here. And the decisions of bringing, like you said, the interface of many people. I think even to conceive of really having all these people, to me, is very intimidating. You know, I wouldn't have really, you know, I don't know how it felt to have researchers, historians, actors, and activists, and, you know, really be honest to each other. Which is, you know, and when you're honest, you tear each other up. And I think, at least in the feminist circles and the women's movement, we know we are experts at doing it. We will do it, but still kind of have things in common to hold hands. So somewhere I think feminism has taught us to have difficult dialogues, to face bitterness, distrust, and disagreement with a lot of outbursts of passionate anger, and also to celebrate those outbursts with excitement, at least after 30 years. You know, so there are, so it is kind of, so that leads me to what Anuradha began this with, vulnerability. I keep telling her, you know, where she says, ha, and lies down, that's like that's a great image of what happens when a production is underway, you know. So that's, and I'm just going to qualify that vulnerability with what Richa Nagar calls as radical vulnerability. And she uses it in the context of activists, the Sangathan in UP, the plays that they do, and the feminist discussions that they have around it. And so she's that radical vulnerability, I'm quoting her, maybe not verbatim, is not a one-way street of endless generosity and openness. There's no way that we are going to romanticize that, just like we don't romanticize collectivism either. It is equally about understanding the simultaneous coexistence of inhumanity and humanity within each one of us. And I think it springs up in different contexts. So there are the question of ethics, aesthetics, and justice, which are haunting us all through in our practice. And I think the day it stops haunting us or troubling us, it's better you don't produce art. You know, it's important to have these gnawing things with that. So I just want to end with this one request or demand or, you know, the afterlife of this film and the archive. Like Anu said, this film is so porous and open that Navina just leaves a lot of things to be discussed. And I'm thinking of the documentations, and we only called it documentation, and it was commissioned documentation of Kulavai. We had 5 Kulavais as part of Voicing Silence, addressing these issues as a takeoff from expressions, which we don't have documents, no? Yeah. So, but then when we did the document, I think we did it like school children, you know? So it was like we had our agenda and we were just putting things together and edited it together, but we have the images. That's all we had, you know? So I think in a way, if the Nehru Samora can give us a book theorizing on folktale history, traditional forms, mythologies, which is the axis on which we are dealing with Indian theatre today, I think something like this can become a takeoff for a relook at what is feminist practice of art in general and theatre in particular. And to me, that image is the one where the parapet is there and everyone leans on that, and you know, so that it is kind of telling us to take that gaze, you know, where you are relaxed, you are supported, and you look at things, you know, probably from a point of view of knowing what is feminist consciousness. So I think that kind of clarity, if we can have, this film will probably give rise to almost a full-length book authored by many people whose afterlives after this workshop has taken many forms. Yeah. Thank you.
You know, Mangai opened it up and you said you'll come back to it, the question of, you know, scenes and connections and joins. Because, you know, what you talk about the contribution of the feminist aesthetic vocabulary, we saw a lot of that happening here. You know, like the question of the object, the matka, and how it can be a metaphor, but it's also a real object which women uses. The question of liminal spaces, and I thought with Madhushri's, you know, Nilima's scenographic design, Nilima Sheikh's, how the liminalities were sort of marked out. You've also talked about, you know, excess in scenography. And the question of images, I think Gita mentioned so clearly about, you know, the emblematic images and how they can be sort of relational in many ways, and state encounters. Also very important, you know, it came up in the discussion, representation, interpretation, presence, self-role. And also the question of, you know, the disembodied presences, because sometimes we see the body, then we see parts of the limbs, then we see, you know, the courtesan as a puppet and a voice coming. I mean, those are what we read about in some of your work. So if you would, you know, talk about the aesthetics, the feminist aesthetics, and what this sort of, you know, allows you to connect.
So let me try very briefly. I mean, it's something that, as you say, I've attempted to think about over the years. But I think what became important was, for instance, the curtain becomes quite important as something to conceal and reveal, which is, of course, part of you know, the Yavanika's tradition, what it does. Now here, I think that it becomes also something to break apart, to fragment. So that's why one arm, one, you know, the hair. So the argument would be that the concealing and the revealing would be part of the dramaturgy of it. Now that, of course, came with Nilima working with curtains. Now, the idea of the curtains comes, if I remember, is clearly the space dictating the fact that you can't actually have anything which is materially present in a very big way to be blown off. I mean, the wind is very strong in Kosori. So, I mean, what do you do? How do you make for you know, different kinds of experiences? Now, that is one part. But I think from there we also began learning that there are different ways of actually unspooling a story, and I think that that came about from that time, and it went directly after 2 years into something called in the way that Nilima painted the swiveling structures for Raujan. But that's what at that point I would say would be the understanding of a certain kind of relationship of the painted image to the actor's body, yeah, and which of course runs through then all the collaborations that we've had with Nilima. But what I'd like to just say is that bringing in a puppet, I have not ever worked with puppets. This was the first time that we all together put a puppet, but the puppet was also an attempt to figure or materialize a character who is laden with narrative, and that's Raujan. Yeah? And it's laden with narrative, with the pre-narrative of the courtesan and novel like Nashtar, or to something like to Druswa's novel. So all of this, then we were struggling with how to image, and that becomes an important part. I think the object, let us say, I can only think of 3 objects over there which I think resonate, and that's the stones. And I was just wondering why the size of the stone was what it was, so I wouldn't have been there now. But also the matka, which was, now I think the matka is a curious situation. I'm not sure that I think we could have changed it, or thought about it, or thought about the structure. I think it was the first move to think about the matka. So I think objects and both their obedience to performance and their disobedience to performance, I think began to occur to all of us at that time. I think it's a long route, and I think this relationship of what an object does for itself and what an object is made to do for performance is a friction. And I think that it came out at that time, and I think it has been a search or whatever for a vocabulary all the way through.
It's more of between object and prop.
The prop was not to be, I mean, so you're finding what is a prop. You're finding what is an object and how it moves. You're quite right, from a prop.
No, I remember you used to say that how to tell an actor that this is an object and this is not a theatrical prop.
Rishi, if you want to talk about, because you've also documented theatre and some of Anu's plays, and as a documentary which also stands alone, it's really not only documenting the performance but trying to get the feeling of the space. So if you want to comment on it and your own experience when you document an archive, feminist practices.
Yeah, okay. There is one called Sundari. I will not talk, I'll show you an image where you can see Nilima Sheikh's work, Anuradha Kapoor's work, and my work. Again, after some 10 years after this workshop, one more, and Bhupen. And Bhupen. Bhupen's work unfortunately is not in display, but all these, again, the interfaces that you see here, it started there, though actually it's not about female sexuality and and pots and all. It's something else. The discourse is about female impersonation, again, with gender making. Construction of gender. But my take on it, by that time as a practitioner, I became a documentary filmmaker. So my take was on making of theatre. Again, personal relationships are very important. So because Anuradha has taught me once, so I was always curious on her process of making, or process of directing. So actually I'm trying to, the play is trying to make a play on making of gender, and I'm trying to make a film on making of theatre. I don't know that in this clip it comes through or not. And there are works of Nilima Sheikh and Bhupen Thakur, and of course Vidya is there, and also Gitanjali. More or less the same team, but it's again next decade it's something else. Can you have the light off, please?
This side. देख रहा हूं घोर नाटकीय पलों से भरा ड्रामा। और गैस बत्तियों से स्टेज उजागर है। किसे देख रहे हो? वो नटी कौन है जिसकी गोद में योद्धा का सिर है? इसके काले घुंघराले बाल बादल से लहरा रहे हैं। इसकी गोल गोल बाहें नरमी से योद्धा के गले में पड़ी है। अभी वो नीचे देख रही है, अभी वो ऊपर देखेगी तो उसकी तिरछी चितवन सबका मन मोह लेगी। कौन है ये जादूगर? मैं ही। इसे संसार सुंदरी कहेगा। इसे संसार सुंदरी कहेगा।
जल्दी करो, पहली घंटी बज गई।
लग नहीं रहा यार। और एक तू बैठे बैठे उबासी मत ले, तेरी देखा देखी मुझे भी आती है।
सुबह 7 बजे उठा देते, रात 2:30-3 बजे काम करवाते हैं।
सर्दी या बरसात, कमरे में झाड़ू लगाओ,
नहा धो कपड़े सुखाओ, फिर तालीम। 2 घंटे आराम, तालीम।
शाम 6 बजे भोजन, चलो नाटकशाला।
तालीम तालीम तालीम। हमें तालीम बढ़ाने आए कि नाटक करने के लिए आए?
the audience, if all of you would also like to talk about, what we started with feminist practices and its link to feminist performances, because Madhushri, we know the scribbles of Akka also developed, the sort of built on this question of nudity further. Savitri played the role. We know later Draupadi, that was sort of received, and of course the Manipuri. And Mangai, please feel free to come in. Also the question of feminist politics, which you all have been talking about, that do you go to the larger sort of the political organizations to reach out to a larger constituencies of women, or because you've been part of Shachituna, women's autonomous organizations, or something like that, which is feminist theatre practices, which retains its older connections and genealogical connections, but also there's a break. So when you come back to the Delhi theatre, the institutional spaces with a different sort of audience and these sort of vocabulary, what were the sort of periods of transitions? If three of you would like to respond, and Manga, you want to start, and then Madhushri and Wen, then we can open it up for a few minutes. Started late, so we're running out of time.
I know it's really late, but I really think it's not as if you move from one to the other, at least in my case, because I think we're exploring a whole lot of things. In my case, whether it is classical Tamil literature or contemporary documentary history of feminist thought that V. Geeta was putting together. So, but at the same time, during the lockdown, when we had to really make a statement of migrant workers and the news of sexual abuse which was coming out on the TV, we had to make One Can Only Laugh. And my most recent play is called Ulluram, which is about child sexual abuse. And now, as far as the audience goes, I think even that, not that you're not, you're just ready to play anywhere. I have to play it safe, because when you do the first transgender group of plays, I didn't want to take it to any of the all-male colleges in the city. We waited. It's like 20 years now, exactly. 2003 was the first performance. But now, of course, there are many groups and there are many performances. So it's kind of very slow. And this child sexual abuse, it opened in 21 December. And only now this month I'll get a chance to take it to Tamil Nadu Corporation School teachers, which is, I think, my primary audience that I would like to have, because they are the ones who are going to be interacting with the students, with the children on a daily basis. So for me, it doesn't remain watertight compartment. Sometimes it does feel like being back to square one, and I think that's important,
Okay, no, we are never in square one, because squares all the time shifts. You need to change the square actually and place yourself within the square. I want to actually share a very feel-good story, but it's true when one feels really part of. Earlier, Vishnupriya asked that, how about working with women's groups and activist groups and doing theatre for them. And so in that context, I want to say, at one point, it was like, there is an agenda, there is an issue, movement needs to mobilize people, needs to make people aware, it was given to them, you make as best as possible a narrative around it. But it can be other way around, that the artwork or a kind of generational artist thought can influence political image. And I will share one example. I know it's a rare example, it doesn't happen too often, but it's good, to the younger generation, it should be known. I would trace it here, or even earlier than this, than Kasuri 89. As you can see, Mahadevi Akka is used many a times. It's talked about the image, and of course Bhanumati Rao's wonderful image of the grey hair, where very cleverly Anuradha actually changed the concept of body and sexuality. Because Mahadevi Akka going naked, I mean, although it is said always in a very religious sense, but there was a lot of sexual connotation to it. And then Bhanumati, wonderfully sensuous image of a very old woman that comes on stage, and that's an image, but it's just a tentative note. It was almost like a scribble. Then Nilima Sheikh actually painted, and many a times I know because she's a personal friend, she painted and she erased them. Because she was trying to paint Mahadevi Akka, and she erased them because it's just not happening. Figuring the woman, figuration of the woman, the nude body. What is nudity? And then after 10 years, I decided to make a film on Mahadevi Akka, and believe me, for some reason, I didn't remember that in Kasoli workshop we worked on Akka. For me, I discovered A.K. Ramanujan and Bhakti. Much later I realized, no, actually, somehow that Kasoli workshop must have stayed in my head. But anyway, I went to Nilima Sheikh and I said that I want to use some of your images. She said, but I erased them because I'm very unhappy. I said, then paint it for me again. So there is a sequence she's painting. Mind you, those paintings nobody has seen, only seen the film because she erased them also. And I made the film and she saw it and she said, the film is not complete. I said, why? She said that, what is your concept of nudity? I don't see a nude body conceived by you in the film. You just talked about, quoted so and so, so and so, so and so. So anyway, so I had many sleepless nights over it. Then decided to go to Savitri. Savitri, you may know, this actor, wonderful, great actor from Imphal. She, according to me, I went to Manipur, I explained the film. Film was ready, except that sequence. I showed it to her and I told her there will be a nude sequence. But there was some confusion, and during the shooting, she doesn't speak in Hindi or English, so I couldn't speak to her directly. Kanhara, who is a friend, her director and her husband came and said, but you never told us that she'll have to be actually a nude sequence. I said, but I thought I came all the way to Imphal to explain that. Now, this is not to be, my whole unit is watching me. What will our feminist director do now? Will she force a guest artist to give a nude shot or not? Though, I mean, it's a post-menopausal body, but will she do that or not? And if we don't do that, I mean, I was working for a public trust, so lots of public money get wasted because the whole is shooting this. So it's like I cannot use Savitri's service. So it was a very tense moment. And my cameraman is constantly telling me the light is going. It was a daylight shot. It was a daylight, open air nude sequence, very daring concept. And my cameraman said, light is going, we won't be able to take the shot. And suddenly I hear a voice, very unfamiliar voice, because Savitri never spoke in English. She said, roll camera, action. Generally, director says. She becomes the director at that moment. She was wearing a bathrobe because she had given a shot in water before that. And she threw that bathrobe and she started walking naked. Now, for a sequence like that, I would have asked other people to leave the field. I didn't do that because I was not prepared. So the whole village was standing there. And she did the shot. I was far from the camera and I was just hoping the cameraman had switched on the camera. I mean, she did the shot and I never met Savitri since then. For some reason, it just never happened. It's a very iconic shot. Next year, they did Documentaries. And Kanhara says that she insisted about that frontal image. Kanhara said, no, not frontal, we'll do it symbolically. She said, no. So actually, I met Kanhara and Kanhara said that something happened after giving that shot in Akka. That her body has opened to herself, and it has become a moment of resistance. Now, mind you, it is Akka, and then everybody in Kasoli, that Mahashita Devi, Dobdi, Nilima's work, and as you know, these are all 2000 to 2003. That is, we shot Akka, and Dobdi was produced by Kanhalal, and 2004 was Manipur Protest.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the greatest, closest to activism I have ever come to.
Would you like to? Because it sort of reminded me of Janelle Reiner's work that, theatre can do something very critical, but how there's a concentric circles of the larger public domain, how documentaries, films travel in different ways, and theatre right at the center. So I just was thinking of that.
I'm going to try to say it from another direction. I think what Navina's film produces for me in terms of thinking about certain journeys is the fact that pedagogical practice has many ways of circulating. And for me, I think after '89, many of the works that I did, I had moved completely away from street theatre. But many of the works that I did with the group Vivati, and later many of the ideas that were possible to discuss were in the classroom. And I think that it was there, I might put it in some ways, that it is about circulating a certain idea, materializing it in the classroom at National School of Drama, and which would become, I think, some ways of a formation of rethinking certain roles in the theatre. And I think those roles, not just gender roles, not just performing gender, but also communicating about it. There's anecdotal details which would be many about even the grammar of directing. I mean, Navina's film reminds me that I was really taking a very thin line. I didn't know at that moment how to communicate as a quote-unquote director. Yeah, I didn't know. Because I was coming from a particular position of making collaboratory work, improvisation was primary. And I think that from there, it just reminds me very, very much that the way she has taken it, that you have to find that role which doesn't necessarily be a mirror of various kinds of directorial practices. And I think those directorial practices as well as teaching practices, I think for me, quote unquote, if there's anything called activism, then it actually came into the classroom. And I think that's where, for me, and there is a resonance. Please.
Shall we take one round of questions?
I think the people who have to eat have left.
Okay, so let's take some questions and then three of you please respond to whichever you want.
Hello. So the film has been amazing and very energizing, and also I feel pensive on many accounts. I think also because among the many things that one can think and reflect on, one of the things is this amazing collegiality. You said that you didn't want to use the word intersection. But I think there is an amazing cohesiveness because of this commitment to process and amazing collegiality and trust. And I often feel, and at some point Anamika says that, it's how grateful she is because this is a give me a second. Yeah, Anamika says that it's a lonely space, and I think that sense is much more now. The sense of not really for example, these workshops don't happen anymore. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm behaving like this. It's menopause as well. And of course, nothing to laugh about. So that's there. And I'm also a little bit, it's ironical that we speak of integration and we speak about maybe also activism and the overlaps and theatre, the world of theatre being informed. But I don't think that the world of visual arts is that diverse. So for instance, another work was made in 1999 called Bird, which also changed things, but somehow that finds a lot of theoretical part of discourse in other places, but I find that these are so segregated around in our circles. That's not seen to be something which seems to have informed question around gender or nudity or various ways in activism can be seen. And again, the point was not to draw attention to myself, but the point was really to say that how do we experience and also ask questions about what is feminist practice today, when I do feel one other thing, at least for me, is very clear is that these blind spots and spaces of loneliness have only exacerbated.
Thank you. That was actually the last point to discuss. Thank you for bringing it. Nisha, Aman, Malaika, and Kandaya.
Thank you for this discussion. And my question in a way is for all three of you, because all of you have tried to address it in some ways. So feminism at the same time, and I'm not putting it into binary, but it is a self-reflexive exercise, but it also performs itself in public sphere. Now, when this sort of process of formation takes place, where one is trying to work through one's body, but at the same time that body has to perform in public sphere, respond to what the public sphere is going to and how the body wants to protect itself. How do you see those coming into like you said, it's processual. So what goes in and comes out is not so clear or linear. So how do you see that balance being? I don't know if balance is the right word, but the mix being made at the time. Am I being able to be? Yeah.
Hello and thank you so much. My question is also about bodies, and I think this was one of the examples. Basically my question is that in our imagination of feminist productions, taking this as an example, we see bodies which fit into the stereotypical imagination of what bodies can be put on stage. So there is a certain size when we see on stage, and while also basically who will play the protagonist, it's always the ability of bodies that is being seen. So how do we see the inclusivity when it comes to shapes or sizes of bodies? Do you see a limitation there when it comes to diversity in the size of bodies? How acceptable are we to seeing something big bodies on stage?
Oh, okay. So first of all, thank you. What a brilliant panel, and it was so lovely to see the documentary itself. But I'm an incurable social scientist, so it kind of comes to my mind that wonderful art processes are in motion as we see through it. But when it is being performed, I am guessing that there was one end product and a performance. So who came to see them? People of Kasoli? Who was the audience of that production? And is there a way to, I don't know, access, what they thought maybe? So I'm sure those who were there, if you would like to reflect on the audience and their response to such an interesting kind of production that we can see from here.
That's a nice question. Just to go back to the idea of the archive,
been interested in knowing, and I mean from all three of you, that how do you see the feminist documentation of women's narratives, which is also then led through theatre? So how important, or what is the peculiarity in your opinion of a feminist lens to also produce a feminist narrative, which is through the archive? So what does a feminist lens actually produces? So like Navina is looking at this workshop in a certain way, where we see women's bodies on stage, directed by a woman. So so the peculiarity of the feminist lens to create these sort of archives.
If I might start with your question, I think that what Navina's choice was the feminist lens. She was choosing to show things that are not complete, and I think that in itself is a kind of formal consideration that many, I think, women theatre makers have had an interest in. So that, just recently there's a quote from Romeo Castellucci, which he had given for an interview at Thrissur, and he had said, "I give the spoon, I don't give the soup." So I think that it's quite important that she was showing us all the joineries, all the breakings, nothing complete. So I think that in itself perhaps is an important lens to actually see that in the archives and in the way of regrouping things, you are privileging, or you are putting on as the major view the incompleteness of certain things. One of the things that would seem to me is that whenever we document, let us say in the drama school, document something, we always end it with a production. Now, though here there was a production, but it was as informal as this, and that is something that it was as informal. So, in some senses, some of the audience, the audience was the people at the conference, and few people from Kasoli, but I don't think they saw it as a production. And I have to say, for many years, I never saw it as a production. I've always seen it as something that was a building blocks of ideas and possible ways of doing things. Many have been left behind, some have stayed. So I think that I would say that might be one of the ways of looking at material, where you are actually not producing closures, that you're producing actually a series of configurations or series of constellations. I'm thinking of that great quote on the tangent by Benjamin, who says, "The lines cross but once," and they go after that. So I think that might be the lens. And I don't think it's possible in many shows and performances to do it, but at least the desire to do it might.
The other questions, that is the body on stage and the audience and what happens to feminism, none of this I have anything to respond to. So I'm skipping those. I'm only coming to you. Those questions are Mangai's expertise, so she will attend to them. Kumika, I'm just reading what we sent around from SSAF as the kind of keywords for or key sentences for this event, which is a quote from Ursula Le Guin. Prior to preeminence of sticks, swords, and the hero's long, hard killing tools, our ancestors' greatest invention was the container. The basket of wild oats, the medicine bundle, the net made of your own hair, the home, the shrine, the place that contains whatever is sacred, the recipient, the holder, the story, the bag of stars. Unquote. So our statement was, feminist archiving practice means to develop skills to find, bring into light, to incubate, and also to materialize the choice to conceive or to reveal.
So you say that
Coming-
to conceive or to reveal.
Yeah, coming straight up to right to veils. I mean, from Akka or even prior to that to contemporary lives, to wearing veils.
Wow. Maybe we should end with a poetic line. At least about the bodies. In theatre, of course, there's a lot of constrictions of which group works with which group and stuff like that. But I think in what I would call as contemporary dance, contemporary movement or contemporary dance, I think there's a lot more consciousness among the dancers to really work with different body types. And one of them that just comes to my mind now is Shabari Rao from Bangalore, who had, I think they had a full show on big bodies, and in a way it was really talking about some of the earliest debates in feminism about body types and your fashion industry and commercialization and objectification of the body, So I don't know of theatre people who have made concerted effort to do that. And but then, I find the same problematic when it comes to LGBTQA people, So the depiction of the trans body or a homosexual body is still wrought in a lot of readings, misreadings, overreadings, underreadings, call it whatever, And in a way that in itself is restricting because, each one of us is going by our own contacts and understanding of the different bodies that you have. But I really feel about when we talk about the bodies, it is the courage to touch the scar of the wounds that might just bleed open. I don't know, that's the image that I keep saying, and in many feminist ways, I remember Anamika saying once, when women get together, there's laughter. But there is laughter of the many wounds, so that it's a very complicated narrative of really layering it with that, and I am really dead against proclaiming feminist art. I think it probably comes from the consciousness that one has and the alertness with which we do. I would now go back to all those autobiographical narratives of the trans people, which were trusted. I think that's the word Madhu used for her Majlis archive of the Kashmir. They were trusted to me. So recently when I spoke to one of them, I said, did I force you? Was it helpful? Was it triggering? Because I am dealing with a lot of Me Too issues myself and in my state. All of you know about Kalakshetra, of which I'm an alumna. So there's so much that's kind of bothering me, and I went back. But then one of my friends who runs the Trans Resource Center in Madurai, Priya Babu, one of my earliest collaborators in the trans work. So she said at that time it was so difficult. There are days when we had cursed you, and I think, but then she said if we hadn't done it then, we wouldn't have really got here now. So I think it's a double-edged, to use Bama's words, it's curricle, it's a palm, I don't know what it is in English. Yeah, it is that. So you go this way, you'll get hurt that way. You go this way, you'll get hurt. But then that knowledge that getting hurt and overcoming that and being able to talk about it and still moving on in life to me, it's a great learning, you know, and I think I have only seen feminists having the courage to do it, because you don't really own a kingdom. You're not going to get the government next, you know, so therefore I think we are walking with less burden. So there is no images that we want to really build, you know, so therefore I think it's okay.
And we can go on fast, but I invite Gayatri to come and give the final.
And we hope we can have each of you individually at some time or the other.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gayatri, the Associate Director of Grants at the Sher-Gil Arts Foundation. On behalf of SSAF, I would like to thank Merl Kruger and Rubaita Jaliwala for bringing the fifth wall to India. And I would also like to thank all the panelists for this engaging discussion. Thank you, Madhushri, Mangai, Anuradha, and Vishnupriya. I thank the audience for joining us and for your engaged attention. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues at SSAF and for their contribution to this event. Thank you, Latika Gupta, Director of Projects, Saurav Sil, Managing Visual Design, Media and Archives, Malvika Madgulkar for Communications, and Santosh Sani, our Accounts Executive. I would also like to thank the Goethe Institute Max Müller Bhavan for all their support. Thank you to Katerina Gore, Farah Batul, Kanika Kutiala, Shweta Vahi, and Nidhi Kaur. Thank you also to the School of Arts and Aesthetics at JNU for supporting us to present the fifth wall in Delhi. Thank you Vishnupriya Dutt, Surya Nandini Narayan, Rahul and others. The fifth wall is being launched in several cities in India, including Delhi, Bangalore, Pune and Mumbai. So if you're traveling in the next week to any of these cities, I hope you do catch the program. Will be different in each of the cities. Thank you.